All right, everybody, it's about to get very busy for the Buffalo Sabres and for general manager Kevyn Adams. And to talk about these next couple of weeks, we are joined by Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic. He was in Buffalo, then he was in New England. Now he's in Buffalo. Welcome back, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good to be back.
So Fairburn and I have known each other for a very long time. He has always been a hockey guy. He loves hockey. He played hockey, and now you get to cover hockey. So what's the transition been like these first couple weeks?
Yeah, it's been exciting. You know, it's cool to see this town excited about its hockey team again. It feels like when I moved here in 2014 until when I moved away last fall, there wasn't a lot of reasons to get excited about the Buffalo Sabres, but now the way they finished the season and what Kevyn Adams and Don Granato have going, there's a little bit of optimism in the air around this hockey team, and I think it's warranted.
So you were at the Combine, you were covering the Combine, you were talking to people not just here in Buffalo, but really from around the league, and you were talking to your coworkers that cover the entire league. What is the sense about the Sabres? Do people feel like they are trending in the right direction? Because that I kind of get that vibe, at least here in Western New York.
I definitely get that vibe around the league in introducing myself to people and, you know, letting them know that I'm covering the Sabres and talking to some colleagues. There's a lot of positive energy about what these guys are doing, and I think a lot of people didn't know what to expect out of Kevyn Adams when he got this job because he was a relative unknown. He was inexperienced in this particular role, but a lot of people have been impressed. And I think when you talk to agents and other people around the league, that positive energy matters because if players are enjoying playing in Buffalo again, word gets around. And I think that can impact them in free agency and in trade talks going down the line. So I think it's much like what the Bills were trying to do a handful of years ago when Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane took over, just trying to change the energy around the team, change the culture, and make people think a different way about the team. And I think that's starting to happen based on, you know, the early conversations I've had.
So when we look at this team and we look at kind of the core that they have built, it feels like most of the guys who we think should be around next year will be. But there's also some tweaks that they need to make. So as we head into the offseason, is there any one area you think the Sabres need to address, whether that be in free agency, a trade, or even in the draft?
I think they absolutely need to get a goaltender. I think it's the one glaring spot on the roster that needs help. And look, they have a lot of money to spend. They have 3 first-round draft picks. They have a lot of resources that they could use to trade or to sign and upgrade all across the roster. And I understand Kevyn Adams and his approach of not wanting to hit fast forward on the rebuild and do things that will cause them to have some problems down the road in terms of the salary cap. But I think they can afford to spend at goaltender. Frankly, outside of Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, they don't have a goaltender with NHL experience on the roster. And I think when you're a young team trying to learn how to win in the NHL, it's important to have confidence in your goalie. It's arguably the most important position on the ice, and it's a glaring weakness for them. So while they're strong, I think organizationally with prospects, they need help immediately. And they need to go out and either sign or trade for a veteran who can eat up a lot of minutes and make sure that UPL doesn't have to handle the whole net himself.
For those of you who don't know, Fairburn was a goalie, so obviously he's got a soft spot with the goaltender position. But how do they balance that? How do they balance making sure that this team is better next year, but also realizing that you can't go all in, that you can't press fast forward? Do you think there's a way that they can kind of do both here?
I do think that. I think whether it's with trades or in free agency, you just have to be smart about what you're spending, not just now, but into the future, because they have some contracts coming up on their roster, and you don't want a move you make now to cost you some of the talent that you've been drafting and developing in your organization. You want to be able to sign Tage Thompson and Rasmus Dahlin. You want to be able to keep Dylan Cousins around when it's time for him to get another contract. So yes, you can make some short-term moves. They have $35 million in salary cap space. They're really, you know, trying to get to the salary cap floor as much as they are trying to spend to the limit. But I think making a few moves doesn't necessarily cost you in the long term. The other part of it that I think is important to consider, though, is that they don't want to make a move that costs one of the young players ice time either. Mm-hmm. It's not just about the money, it's about making sure that these young players who are now ready to be in the NHL get some minutes. And so the forward group looks mostly set. Like I said, they probably need a goaltender. They might need some help on defense. But I think spending like crazy at the top of the free agent board just isn't a recipe for success.
If you were Kevin Adams, what would you do with Victor Olofsson? Because he needs a new deal if he's going to stay in Buffalo. Last year was a little bit inconsistent. He started slow, then at the end there was a little bit of a surge. He's a polarizing player. What would you do if you were Kevin Adams in that situation?
You know, provided the price is right, I think that's a player worth keeping around. I think Don Granato has shown that he's able to get the most out of players, and the way that Victor Olofsson has performed at his best, he's an asset on your power play. And I think having a goal scorer like that in a league that seems like it is starting to hit a goal scoring boom, I think is an asset for this team. Now, they can't go crazy with it, but I think given, you know, some of the questions that you mentioned, it's possible to lock him up on an affordable deal and keep him in Buffalo for the foreseeable future. And I think drafting and developing players like that is going to be their bread and butter going forward. And so being able to keep some of that talent in Buffalo and not let it walk out the door, I think is a big deal.
Transitioning over to the draft, the Sabres have a ton of picks, and they've got a ton of high picks, 3 first-round picks. They've got a lot of different options that they can do. Not necessarily specific names, but are there things the Sabres need to get in the draft that you would say would make it a success for them?
You know, they have 3 first-round picks, like you said, so what Kevin Adams has is a lot of options. You know, he has more options than other general managers. He could trade one of those picks and maybe address a short-term need like goalie. He could take bigger risks in the first round. I think getting high-end offensive talent should be the aim, considering that seems like where a lot of the talent in the first round of this draft is. I also, you know, one of the things I'll be watching come draft week is what happens with some of these Russian prospects. And it's a tricky balance because you don't know when you'll be able to get those players over to North America. But if there's a team that's in position to take that risk, it's a team that has multiple first-round picks and a team that clearly trusts its Russian scouting based on what they did in the draft last year. So I think that might be an area where they could, you know, take advantage of a little bit of, you know, hesitancy from other teams and, you know, find a way to add maybe a top 10 talent in the middle or end of the first round.
It's something that I've said in the past, and I usually say teams that win the offseason don't ever actually win games. And I know I'm taking that to, you know, I'm exaggerating that a little bit. But when we look at the Sabres and we look at all the money that they have to spend just to get to the cap floor, what is your approach on how they should approach free agency? Do you think they need to be active, or is it just kind of make a couple moves and then just let this young core go out and figure it out?
I think they need to be smart about it. I don't think, you know, spending like crazy and being the team that hands out the most money in free agency should be the goal, because I know some people are ready to see this team get to the postseason. It's been a long time since they've had a competitive team that's played in the playoffs, and I think they're getting there. I think they have an outside shot to get there this season, but really they should be thinking about the long term, and balancing the short and long term is really the crux of what Kevin Adams has to do this offseason. So I could see a few middle, you know, tier moves, maybe not spending at the top of the free agent pool, but making sure that they're still in a position financially next offseason to be competitive at the top of the free agent market and to be able to offer their own players competitive deals to stay, assuming, you know, some of these players continue to develop the way that they have so far. So I just don't think they should do anything in the next month that would jeopardize what they're trying to do next year and into the future.
Are there any names you think Sabres fans should be keeping an eye on, whether that's a potential free agent, somebody maybe who could be available in the trade market, or even somebody in the draft who you think would be a really strong fit for the Sabres?
You know, Matthew Savoy is a forward prospect at the top of the draft that I think would make a lot of sense. He brings a ton of energy and plays the game really fast, and I think that's part of what Don Granato is trying to build with this team and the identity that he wants to create. And I think in goal, you could look at Ville Husso out in St. Louis as a free agent. Jack Campbell in Toronto is a free agent. I wouldn't be surprised if they sign multiple veteran goaltenders, because not only do they need NHL players in net, but they need some guys to be able to play in the AHL as well, because their top prospects are going back to college this year. So they might need to make multiple additions in goal. And those are a couple of names that stand out to me.
From the conversations that you've had and just the kind of general vibe of it all, how active do you think the Sabres will be this offseason? Do you think it's maybe quieter than some people expect? Or do you think they realize that now is the time where they have the flexibility, they have the money, where they can go out and, I don't want to say make a splash, but maybe make more moves than people anticipate?
I think if we're taking Kevin Adams at his word, it might be quieter than people want it to be because of what we mentioned, that they have an eye toward the future. And I don't know that they're necessarily thinking that they have to get to the playoffs this season or else. I think it's the goal, and it's certainly attainable if things go their way. But I think next year is the year that you'll see maybe a splashier offseason. Look, do they have potentially a few moves up their sleeve? I think so, because they have the money and they need to spend some of it, and they have a massive hole at goalie. So they have all the ingredients to make somewhat active offseason. I just don't think it will be the type of go for it offseason that some people really want to see after the way they finish the season. I think they're going to take a little bit more of a patient approach.
And my last Sabres question for you is, with the young core, with the addition of Jack Quinn, with the full season of Owen Power, probably J.J. Peterka in some capacity, and maybe some tweaks here and there, you said you think the Sabres are going to be close. Realistically, how close do you think this team can be to ultimately making the playoffs and ending their current drought?
I think so much of it depends on what they do in net, because you look around the league and some average teams and some young teams can really get carried a long way depending on the type of play they get at goalie. And if they make a big move there, perhaps this team can get farther along than people expect. Maybe they're there a year sooner than they thought because, a player in net can carry them. Look at what happened with the Rangers this year. So is that realistic that they get to the playoffs? Maybe not. Maybe it's not the exact expectation that this team should have. But I think if they make the right moves, they could be right on, knocking on the door, right on the fringe of the playoffs. If you look at the pace they finished the season with, that's right where they would be. And if they get improved play in net compared to what they had a year ago, then I think there's no reason to think they shouldn't be able to maintain that over an 82-game season. Of course, it depends on injuries and it depends on the moves they make. But as it stands now, there is an opportunity for them to be right on the fringe of the postseason.
All right, my last one for you. So you moved back to Western New York, or you're in the process of moving back to Western New York. What were the things you had to do when you finally got back to your adopted hometown? Like, what were the things that you missed when you moved away that you had to hit up when you came back?
Well, of course, we had to get some wings, right? It's not something you can really find anywhere else, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, that's probably the top of the list. But mostly just seeing, family and friends that we've missed for quite a while. It's a special place with a lot of special people to us, and we're really excited to get back.
We're excited to have you back. Matthew Fairburn with The Athletic talking about the Sabres. It's going to be a busy month for the team, and it's also going to be a busy month for him. Make sure you follow along with all of his work. Matthew Fairburn on Twitter. Thank you.